All right, French learners, ready for another deep dive. Today we're going to tackle something that might seem a little intimidating at first, but stick with me because it's actually super elegant and satisfying once you get it, I promise.
It is.
We're talking about forming the negative in French.
Ooh, yes.
Specifically with ne pas, ne plus, and ne.
Those are the big ones.
There are the big ones. And for any of you out there using Pronunciator to boost your French skills, think of this as your secret weapon for that library module certificate.
Yeah, you'll be mastering those negative sentences in no time.
You'll be a negation ninja. Okay, so let's break it down, shall we? Starting with the most basic building block,
Ne pas. The foundation.
Exactly. Now, it seems pretty straightforward, but trust me, there's more to it than meets the eye. Like when you want to say, I don't eat in French, it's not just a direct translation, right?
Nope, not at all.
So how would we say that?
Je ne mange pas.
Je ne mange pas. Okay, so ne comes before the verb mange, and pas comes after it.
Exactly. And here's the fascinating part. Pas literally means...
Wait a minute, step. So like, I do not eat a step.
That's the literal translation. I know it sounds a little strange.
It does, but it also kind of makes sense. Like, it's not just, I don't eat. It's more like, I don't even take a step towards eating.
Right. It adds this nuance of not at all or not a bit.
I love it. So it's not just about memorizing the words, but understanding the concept behind them. It's like a little window into how French speakers think.
Exactly. And once you grasp that concept, using ne pas becomes so much more intuitive.
It's like a light bulb moment. Okay, so we've got nup, down. But what about expressing no longer and nothing? That's where ne plus and ne rien come in, right?
I got it.
So it's like they're building on that same ne pas structure, but with a twist.
Exactly. Think of them as variations on a theme.
Okay, I like that. So how would we say she no longer works here using ne plus?
That would be Elle ne travaille plus ici.
Elle ne travaille plus ici. So again, ne before the verb travail and plus after it, just like with ne pas.
Exactly. But notice how that one little word plus completely changes the meaning.
It's so powerful, right? Just one word can convey so much nuance.
Absolutely. And the same goes for no. Oh, yeah. If you wanted to say, I understand nothing, you'd say, je ne comprends rien.
Je ne comprends rien.
Ah.
Okay, got it. So we've covered ne pas, ne plus, and ne flux. But is the placement always this straightforward? Like, what happens when we start dealing with different tenses or pronouns and all those other fun French grammar elements?
That's where things can get a little more interesting. The basic pattern holds true for simple tenses, but the position of those negative adverbs can shift depending on the sentence structure.
Ooh, okay, that sounds like a potential brain twister.
It can be, but with a little practice, it becomes second nature. Don't worry.
All right, so give me an example then. How would we say, I don't go to the library in French?
That would be, je ne vais pas à la bibliothèque.
Je ne vais pas à la bibliothèque. Okay, so still pretty straightforward. Ne pas, neatly surrounding the verb vais. But what happens when we start dealing with compound tenses like the passé composé? Does the word order change?
It does. Instead of surrounding the main verb ne and the negative adverb go before the auxiliary verb, usually that's avoir or être.
Interesting. Okay, so give me an example.
So to say I didn't buy anything, it would be je n'ai rien acheté.
Je n'ai rien acheté. Okay, so ne and rien come before the auxiliary verb a, and the past participle acheter comes after.
Exactly. And you'll notice that the E in ne gets dropped before a vowel, so it becomes N.
Ah, right. That's one of those little French quirks that always trips me up. But I'm starting to get the hang of it, I think. It's like a grammatical dance. We have to learn the steps.
I love that analogy. And remember, practice makes perfect. Pronunciator has a ton of exercises that can help you master these structures and make them feel totally natural.
Practice makes perfect. That's my motto. Speaking of practice, though, what happens when we throw in an object pronoun into the mix? Like, how would we say, I don't speak to him anymore?
Great question. In that case, both ne and the negative adverb, which is plus, in this sentence sandwich the object pronoun which comes before the main verb. So it would be, je ne lui parle plus.
Je ne lui parle plus. Because it's like ne and the negative word are playing a game of tag with the pronoun.
Exactly. And the pronoun always wins by staying closest to the verb.
That's a good way to remember it. Okay, now I'm curious. What if we want to express something like neither, nor, in French? Is there a special way to do that?
There is. French has a very elegant construction for that. Ne, ni.
Ne.
Ni, ni. Oh, that sounds fancy.
It does have a nice ring to it, doesn't it? It might sound intimidating, but it's actually quite logical.
All right, so how would we use it in a sentence? Give me an example.
Let's say you want to say, I am neither going out nor staying at home. In French, that would be, je ne sors ni ne reste à la maison. Je ne sors ni ne reste à la maison. Wow, that sounds so poetic. I see how the first ni replaces pas, and the second one introduces the next negated element. It's like saying, not this and not that.
Precisely. And you can continue this pattern for as many elements as you need to negate.
That's amazing. So French negation isn't just about saying no, it's about expressing a whole range of nuanced ideas.
Exactly. And the more you explore these structures, the more you'll appreciate the elegance and precision of the French language.
It's like uncovering hidden treasures. And speaking of treasures, Pronunciator has all the tools you need to practice and master these forms.
It's like your own personal French grammar guide, always there to help you along the way.
I love it. Exploring all these nuances is making me realize that there's so much more to French negation than I ever imagined. It's not just about saying no, it's about choosing the right structure to convey the exact shade of meaning you want.
You hit the nail on the head. And as you become more comfortable with these structures, you'll find that they become less about rules and more about expressing yourself with precision and style.
Adding a little French flair to our conversations. Speaking of which, I've always been curious about how to form negative questions. Is it as simple as just adding ne pas to a regular question?
It's a bit more nuanced than that. But don't worry, it's not overly complicated once you get the hang of it. Let's take a simple question like, are you coming tonight?
Okay.
In French, that would be viens-tu ce soir?
Viens-tu ce soir?
Now, to make it negative, you'd say ne viens-tu pas ce soir?
Ne viens-tu pas ce soir? Okay, so we invert the subject and verb just like in a regular question, and then we add ne pas around them.
You got it. Now, what if you wanted to use ne rien in a question? Like, didn't he see anything?
Ooh, good one. How would we say that?
That would be n'a-t-il rien vu?
N'a-t-il rien vu? Okay, so we invert the subject and auxiliary verb a in this case, and then we put neuf at the beginning and rien before the past participle vu.
Exactly. You're a natural at this.
Ah, shucks. Well, I've had a great teacher.
Speaking of great teachers, Pronunciator has tons of examples and exercises to help you practice forming negative questions.
Yes. Pronunciator is your best friend when it comes to mastering French grammar. All right, so we've covered a lot of ground here. But are there any common mistakes that people often make when it comes to French negation?
Oh, definitely. One very common mistake is using double negatives, especially with rien.
Ah, yeah, I've seen that happen. Like saying, I don't see nothing in English.
Exactly. So you might be tempted to say something like, je ne peux pas rien manger, which literally translates to, I cannot eat nothing. But in French, that's a big no-no.
So even though in some English dialects, a double negative emphasizes the negative in French, it just creates confusion.
Right. It's like you're negating the negation and end up saying the opposite of what you intended.
Okay, so how do we avoid that trap?
Simple. Just remember to use only one negative element. So the correct way to say I can't eat anything would be je ne peux rien manger.
Je ne peux rien manger.
Got it.
No double negatives in French. What other pitfalls should we be aware of?
Another common mistake is negating verbs in the infinitive form.
Oh, yeah, I remember struggling with that one. Like, where do you even put the negation when the verb isn't conjugated?
It can feel a little counterintuitive, but the rule is actually quite simple. The negation goes directly before the infinitive verb itself. So, for example, il ne faut pas manger trop means you shouldn't eat too much.
Il ne faut pas manger trop. Okay, so ne pas comes before the infinitive manger. Makes sense. It's like the negation is emphasizing the action you're not supposed to do.
Exactly. And this pattern holds true for other negative structures as well. For instance, elle préfère ne plus travailler ici would mean she prefers to no longer work here.
Elle préfère ne plus travailler ici. So whether it's ne pas, ne plus, or ne rien, the negative element always precedes the infinitive verb. Got it. Now, what about those tricky reflexive verbs? Do the rules change them?
The good news is the rules stay pretty consistent. For simple tenses like the present tense, the negation goes around the reflexive pronoun and the verb. So for instance, je ne me lave pas means I don't wash myself.
Je ne me lave pas. Okay, so ne goes before the reflexive pronoun me, and pas goes after the verb lave. Simple enough. But what about compound tenses like the passé composé? Those always seem to throw a wrench in things.
Don't worry, with compound tenses, the negation surrounds the auxiliary verb être, just like with other verbs. So, je ne me suis pas réveillé tôt means I didn't wake up early.
Je ne me suis pas réveillé tôt. Okay, so it follows the same pattern as with regular verbs in the passé composé. Ne and pas some each the auxiliary verb suis. I'm starting to see the logic here.
That's the key. Once you understand the underlying logic, French grammar becomes much less intimidating.
It's like cracking the code. And Pronunciator is the perfect decoder ring.
Absolutely. It breaks down those complex grammar concepts into manageable chunks and provides tons of practice to help you internalize the rules.
I love it. So we've talked about common mistakes with double negatives and negating infinitives. Are there any specific pitfalls we should watch out for when forming negative questions?
Yes, definitely. One common mistake is forgetting to include the auxiliary verb when inverting the subject and verb in compound tenses.
Ah, I see. So someone might incorrectly say, ne vas-tu plus au cinéma, instead of ne vas-tu plus aller au cinéma for, are you no longer going to the cinema?
Exactly. It's easy to forget that little detail when you're focusing on the negation, but remember, the same rules apply for affirmative and negative questions in compound tenses.
Got it. The auxiliary verb is essential. Any other tips for avoiding those negative question blunders?
Another common mistake is using the wrong negative adverb. For example, using ne pas when ne plus is needed or vice versa. This can completely change the meaning of your sentence.
Ah, that's a good point. It highlights the importance of understanding the nuances of each negative structure. It's not just about saying no. It's about choosing the right tool for the job.
And that's why Pronunciator is so valuable. It provides clear explanations and targeted exercises that help you master those subtle differences.
It's like having a personal French tutor in your pocket. Now, I'm curious about something. Is there anything special about negation in informal spoken French? Like, are there any shortcuts or slang terms that we should be aware of?
That's a great question. In informal spoken French, you might hear people dropping the ne and just using pas, plus, or rien. So instead of je ne comprends pas, they might just say je comprends pas.
Je comprends pas. Interesting. It sounds more casual, almost like saying I don't know instead of I don't know in English.
Exactly. But it's important to remember that this is very informal and should only be used in casual conversations with friends and family. In written French or formal situations, stick to the full ne pas structure.
Okay, good to know. It's like knowing when to wear jeans and a t-shirt versus a suit and tie. You wouldn't want to show up to a job interview using informal slang.
Exactly. So while it's fun to learn those informal variations, mastering the formal structures first is essential. That's where Pronunciator's structured approach really shines. It helps you build a solid foundation grammar before introducing those casual variations.
Solid foundation first, then let's have some fun with the slang.
That's the spirit.
So I think we've covered just about everything there is to know about French negation, from the basics of ne pas to those tricky negative questions, and even a little bit of slang. We've really gone deep, haven't we?
We have. And you know what's amazing? There's still so much more to explore in the world of French grammar.
I know, right? It's like an endless adventure. But for now, I think we've given our listeners a great starting point. And remember, Pronunciator is always there to guide you along the way.
Absolutely. So keep practicing, keep exploring, and most importantly, keep having fun with your French learning journey.
Well said. And on that note, we'll be wrapping up our deep dive into French negation with some final thoughts and takeaways in just a moment. Stay tuned. All right, welcome back, everyone. I hope you're ready for the grand finale of our French negation extravaganza.
I know I am. We've covered a lot of ground, haven't we?
We have. From the humble ne pas to those tricky negative questions and even a little bit of French slang, we've really explored the ins and outs of saying no in French.
And hopefully busted some myths along the way.
Definitely. So before we wrap things up, let's recap some of the key takeaways for our listeners. What are the most important things to remember about French negation?
Well, first and foremost, I'd say placement is key. Remember, those negative adverbs aren't just floating around aimlessly in a sentence. They have their designated spots depending on the verb tense, the type of verb, and whether you're using pronouns or other elements.
Right. It's like a grammatical puzzle where each piece has its place.
Exactly. And once you understand the logic behind the placement, it all starts to make sense.
Like a light bulb moment.
Yeah.
And speaking of light bulb moments, what about those informal shortcuts where you drop the nah? Is that something our listeners should be doing?
Well, it's good to be aware of those informal variations because you'll definitely hear them in everyday conversations. But I would say stick to the full ne pas, ne plus, or ne rien structure, especially when you're writing or informal situations.
Think of it as building good habits from the start. You can always loosen up later once you've got the fundamentals down pat.
Exactly. It's like learning to play an instrument. You don't start improvising until you've mastered the basic scales.
Perfect analogy. So we've got placement down. We've talked about formal versus informal usage. Now, what about practice? How can our listeners really solidify their understanding of French negation and make it second nature?
Well, I can't recommend Pronunciator enough. It's like having a personal French tutor at your fingertips with clear explanations, targeted exercises, and even those oh-so-satisfying certificates to track your progress.
Yes, those certificates are like a badge of honor. But even beyond the certificates, the real reward is the feeling of confidence you get when you can express yourself fluently and accurately in French.
Absolutely. And mastering negation is a huge step towards achieving that fluency.
It's like unlocking a whole new level of the language. So to all our listeners out there, keep practicing, keep exploring, and keep having fun with your French learning journey.
And remember, Pronunciator is always there to guide you along the way.
Well said. That's all the time we have for today, but we'll be back soon with another deep dive into the fascinating world of French grammar. Until then, au revoir.
Au revoir, everyone, and happy negating.